Michael Unger here from the MacMillan Space Centre with another edition of Ask an Astronomer. I am here in my office on a bit of an overcast day on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. As always, we are joined by our astronomer Marley, who's been nerding out a lot about those upcoming James Webb images. Of course, we teased that in our last episode. If you are curious about what James Webb is going to be looking at, send Marley a message through our email. And let us know what you think is going to be looking at. Marley, any insights yet as to what James Webb is going to be looking at?
Yes, in fact, they gave a press release yesterday announcing that we should have the images by July 12th, which I low-key called because I said it had to be before the end of that conference that they're having, and that ends on July 15th. And so they kind of expanded on Webb, what it'll be looking at, and they said that the images that will be released will be multiple images, and they will be images that correspond to all four of Webb's key science themes. So the evolution of galaxies, stellar life cycles, the early universe, and other worlds. So anything from those four categories is fair game.
Excellent. Well, I have a feeling we're going to be focusing on all of those four categories a lot in the next coming year. But for this edition of Ask an Astronomer, we are going to have a specific focus, a really exciting focus topic that I am very interested in, and that is Indigenous astronomy. So we have brought in a very special guest, Shandin Pete, who is the assistant professor of teaching at UBC, who has a specific interest in Indigenous astronomy. Hello, Shandin. Thanks for coming on the show.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I like your energy. Keep it up.
Well, this is what we do here. We like to have some fun. So everyone out there in YouTube land, if you have questions for Shandin, please put them in the chat. If you have, specific questions for Marley about the James Webb Space Telescope or anything to do with space, put those in the chat. We may answer them just in the chat, or maybe we may bring them into the show. But suffice to say, we will answer all of your questions. But for the bulk of the show, we're going to hand it over to Shandin to get into this perspective. Shandin, I'm curious to hear from you. Where did you first get interested in the night sky and this specific interest of Indigenous astronomy?
Yeah, it all starts with the question, just like you were saying, encouraging folks to ask questions. That's really where it all started with me, was trying to understand a bit deeper about some of the knowledge that we lost through time and of my own traditions, so I can maybe reconstruct some of those and pass them along, because it would be a shame to lose those, especially since the longest history, or I guess the largest data set, from in any science, is our own human observations. So it's really important to keep those traditions alive, and get people looking up into the sky more than at our screens. We we spend so much time staring into that glowing box.
We do that a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
But of course, the theme here at the Space Center that we always encourage when people walk out of our doors, and hopefully as people watching this show go out tonight, is to look up. There's so much up there, maybe not right now, but the next clear skies that we have. Before you dive into your presentation, Shandin, what is the research that you are at UBC, and you've been at this for a while, and you've been on certainly a journey that you're kind of in the middle of? What is some of the research around Indigenous astronomy have you been delving into?
Well, what I do is I examine our oral traditions, what we have recorded and what's known among the communities, and I try to connect that to a larger process that helps to speak to bigger constructs that are important to human life, in particular, like ethics, morals, and values, things that guide how we utilize knowledge, not just gain knowledge, but how we apply it. So it's really looking at the oral traditions, situating those traditions not only from the oral history, but the ceremonial life, and how we can situate it into the world we know today. That's kind of the springboard to everything. So understanding more about the stars is a big, important part of that.
Yeah, well, let's springboard into some of the visuals that you've pulled for us. And why don't you, I know this is part of a larger presentation that you would normally give. We might not have time for all of it, but, I'm certainly very curious to see just a little taste of some of the work that you've been doing.
Let's do it. Yeah. We'll see how far we can get. And I would encourage you to jump in and ask questions at any time, because this is really very open. So less of a formal presentation and more of an inquiry, guided inquiry together. And hopefully we can reveal some things that are important. So yeah, so this is one of the questions that started my curiosity into a number of things related to what we see when we look up. This is a very familiar image. I think I pulled this from from Stellarium. You can throw up some images, some popular images of asterisms. And these two in particular are in our sky continually, and they've been called Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. And those, of course, in Latin, I think is the big bear and the little bear, right? I'm not a scholar of Latin, but I think I know enough to know that. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. We'll see. So the curious thing about this, when I look at these, is it doesn't really align with my image of what a bear looks like. And in particular, the odd thing about it is this long, weird tail. No bear that I've seen living or in pictures has a tail like that. And so it made me wonder, is it why? Who did bears used to have long tails in the Greek tradition? Or I don't know. I just don't know. So
I've always wondered that as well.
Yeah. So I took a little dive into it, just a really surface level search. And apparently it comes from some tradition of a Greek god, maybe Zeus, grabbing a bear by the tail and slinging him into the sky, which stretched his tail out, which is not, it's understandable. But it made me wonder, and it made me wonder about many different things. Number one was, when did we first start committing our ideas to, say, paper or in a written form or an image? When did we start saying, okay, this is the story of this thing we see in the sky. This is how I'm going to represent it so somebody else can see what I see. I wondered that. And in particular, I wondered about my own traditions where I grew up in Montana, on the lands of my people, the Salish people in Western Montana. So it started this quest on understanding a few things. And when I asked around, a lot of the folks living didn't know what some of the names of the stars were. There was a lot of knowledge that was lost through the last 3-4 decades. So I wanted to know more. And taking this into account, these odd images that didn't seem to fit, I wanted to try to clarify what they might have looked like to my ancestors. So in a lot of our traditions, our older traditions, we had I wouldn't say a limited scope of what we see around us, but it was defined by what we could observe with our 5 senses. So we didn't have telescopes and the fancy instruments. We didn't have a James Webb telescope back in the day to extend beyond what our eyes could see. So this was the image from, I'm not sure this, I think, I don't have the reference right on hand, but this is an image from from a European tradition, like an early image of what reality is, or what we could see and observe from the earth. And this is very similar to some of our oral traditions in Montana, where there was different phases of creation, 4 different phases, which led up to humans today, and animals also being created in that process. But the boundary of what we know about the night sky, there was a definite fence, if you will, a fence as to what is beyond that. And it was, I guess, defined by some of the stories about what we see in the sky. And an important note in this tradition was that it was thought that the sky was essentially a mirror of the earth, not necessarily the earth, but a mirror of what happens on the earth. Now, that's important to understand. So when we look up, we're actually looking down on the sky world. Now, that's important to carry forward as we walk through this. And I'm going to try to be conscious of time here. Okay, so first of all, this is what I could dig up as far as what, and it's more deep than this, but this is going to lead us down a path. So the first couple of things that I found related to what we see in the night sky was a description of these 7 stars called the Spelkusum. and essentially translates to 7 stars. And an early anthropologist who was in our area in the 1930s, he documented some of our ancestors saying that they described this grouping of stars as the day could not arrive until it finished its journey across the sky, which makes me think, okay, that's probably maybe the Big Dipper. And in fact, the anthropologist took it upon himself to interpret this description as saying, oh, they were probably talking about the Big Dipper. And then further, if we go back further in time, we see another documentation of some knowledge. In this case, it was by a Jesuit priest called Gregory Mengerini. And he noted a word that described what he interpreted as the polar star, as the Simchech Anaskit, which essentially translates to a grizzly in the sky, or the grizzly that's in the sky. So from today's, what we know today, of course, the polar star is part of the Little Dipper. So now this brings these 2 constellations kind of into view on what they may or may not be. So myself, I want to triangulate some data, and I want to know more about, well, why were they called the 7 stars, and why was it called grizzly in the sky? But first, I have to insert a very important note in this talk here, is that a lot of these stories are stories of our creation, and there's a strict rule that we're not to tell these stories out of season, and that season is winter. So these stories can only be told during the winter. So I'm going to provide just a very, very brief outline of some of these, and if I even mention it at all, because the belief is, if you talk about these stories in the summertime, the animals can hear you, and they'll be embarrassed by these stories that you're telling about them, and they'll send a snake out to bite you. And I don't want you guys to get bit by a snake, so I'm not gonna, and I don't want to get bit by a snake, because I just don't want to do that. I don't want to do that to anybody. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So moving forward. Yes. So there's a story about a grizzly. So I looked for any stories that mentioned grizzlies and anything that might indicate that a story that describes why this grizzly is in the sky. So there's a couple stories that come out of this that describe a grizzly, and he has brother-in-laws, and they don't like him very much, and they want to do him in. So they go hunt him down, and their particular part of the story describes the brothers. One of them is likes his brother-in-law, so he doesn't want to kill him. One of the brothers has a dog. So this is the little bit of information that I know. Further, there's another story that also describes the same thing, but it says specifically that the 4 parts of the dipper are actually the feet of the grizzly, not necessarily like the body. So the feet of the grizzly. So it makes sense if you reflect on what I said earlier about the concept of what is happening when you look up. You're actually looking down onto another world. So yeah, so then, so what I'm doing is I'm looking for more evidence to say, okay, we have 2 formations in the Greek tradition. They've both been called bears in some manner, and in other traditions across the globe, these 2 constellations have been referred to as many different things. Some of them bears, some of them not. So I want to know more. That's what I want to do. So let's see if I can. Oh, there it is. Okay. So this is important now. So now it reframes. If you remember the first picture where we're seeing the side profile of a bear, well, it reframes that to say, okay, we're not looking at the side profile of a bear. And I wondered, and this led to some curiosity about the origin of the constellation names that we see today. If those are actually derived from some point in when we started to document these stories in book form, which of course lends easier to seeing it from a human perspective, which is on the ground, seeing it visually and horizontally from us. But in this case, we're looking up. And I wondered if the Greek tradition also had this concept of looking up at a mirrored earth. But anyway, so this leads me to trying to decipher which constellation this story refers to. It seems to point to this story being the Little Dipper, but we don't know. But the important part is this understanding that the way we view the stars may not be the way in which they're presented to us today. So we can see this trend also propagated, and I think I got a duplicate slide here. Yeah, so here's the Little Dipper with the story inserted into it. But then again, even the single stars would be just single people on the ground and not this image I showed today. So it really propagates that idea that, well, maybe in order for us to help understand or to help other people understand this story, we might narrate it and illustrate it in a certain way versus how we actually see it in the night sky. Yeah, so let's see, let's strip that away. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so two stories then. Another story emerged where there's also a grizzly bear. These are supposedly the three stars, which are now even further the children of Coyote. And one is fast, one is slow, one's leading a dog. So there's these, then the layers start to get thicker about, well, there's more detail to this. And then the players change a bit. So I want to know more. And this is really what catapults a lot of what I'm doing into diving deeper into some of our traditions. So we see this again in another similar story. Everybody knows this constellation, I think, right? So what is this one? Oh, I got it labeled on there. This is Orion. All right. Yeah. I gave the answer away. Yeah, this is Orion. And typically, what do we see here?
We see a hunter, and also sometimes also the dog as well, with a separate constellation. Right. But maybe I don't know if that's part of where you're going with this. But
well, I mean, but the way we see it is the side profile of a hunter, right? A hunter standing. Well, in our tradition, this is a canoe, and if we apply the convention that we're looking down, then the canoe is actually would be the left shoulder and the right leg and the belt of Orion. So the canoe, then we're looking down on the canoe, and the canoe is a longer story about some brothers that are fashioning up the canoe. I don't want to go into too much detail again, with the caution of the snake bite impending. We don't want to do that. But there's a couple other conflicting stories or stories that seem to align with this, that tell of a longer, I don't know if you call it a saga. How long does it have to be a saga?
a long time ago.
Okay.
Really.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Well, this is a saga then, I guess. Yeah. About these hunters who are hunting a duck, and they're in a canoe. And the duck, of course, is, what is this asterism here?
That's Cygnus the Swan, I believe.
Is that okay? Awesome.
Is that right, Marley?
Oh yeah, that's right.
It's the constellation Cygnus. Yeah.
There's the answer, showed up on the left. Awesome. Yeah. So I think, and this is another one I'm trying to untangle, is I think this is related to Cygnus, and it's one of the stories that I'm working to try to decipher. But I think these are quite a distance apart. Is that correct? If you look in the sky, like this picture doesn't necessarily give us any scale as to how far apart they may or may not be.
I think so, because Orion is generally a wintertime constellation, and right. Cygnus, I think, is more.
Cygnus is summer, because the Deneb makes up the asterism of the summer triangle.
Actually, right around now, actually, I've got on my monthly guide, the monthly constellation for June is Cygnus. So there you go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that leads to more confusion, I guess. If these are related and you can't see them at the same time in the night sky, maybe they're unrelated. I don't know. So I think this is a good place where there's a nice opportunity to collaborate with astronomers trained in Western traditions and those with the indigenous related knowledge to try to uncover some of these relationships. But there's another couple other asterisms or constellations that are important that I've been trying to untangle. And one is about some women that are cooking what we call the camas, which is an important root product in our cultural ways. And there's so the fire is made on top of a earthen oven where the camas is baked. And the women are watching over it, and it's really the women that are often designated to do this, or not designated, I should say, but they're the ones that are responsible for this. And if a man is involved in any way to preparing the whole for this, then it spells a disaster for the final product. So in the story, there's a skunk, and I suppose it's a male, and he's trying to come to disturb this Camus bake. And this particular constellation is what? Can you guess? Let's see.
I have a guess. I don't know if Marley does.
Okay.
Is it the Pleiades?
Oh, close, but not really. So that's not really close at all.
Okay. All right.
No, it's not. Let's show what it is. Let's see. I think I went crazy on animations here. Oh yeah. So look more familiar now.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah. And this is looking at his guide. Check the guide.
Orija?
Yeah. There it is. So again, this is looking down. So each of the stars is like a person. So looking at the top of a person. And I think, and I don't know how to pronounce the name of the one star off to the right. Is that Murphak? Is that how you say that?
Probably.
I'm not sure if that's the right one, if that's the skunk or not. So it's these things, these small details I'm trying to untangle in these stories that I'm not too sure. But this is where I'm at so far. Now this leads to one other, and how are we doing for time?
Yeah, we've got a few more minutes.
A few more minutes. This might take a while. So let me get right to the next thing that I've been trying to figure out. And it's related to this one statement. Let me just get through this because this is a bit of a longer description, but I got some. Okay. So there's this statement that was made that was collected by one of the anthropologists that swung through Montana in the 1930s. He said there's a group of three stars that rose from the place that was between the sun and moon, and it never changed its position of rising. So this is one of my ancestors saying this to the anthropologist. And I thought, I wonder what that could be. What is that? And not being as a trained astronomer, and I don't even know if a trained astronomer could untangle what that may or may not be. But what I think it is this. So there was also recorded along with this bit of information the phenomenon of when the full moon nearest the winter solstice, where that rises on the horizon in the morning, and then where the actual winter, or where the winter solstice sun rises as well. So the full moon nearest the winter solstice will rise at the same place as the summer solstice sun. And of course, the winter solstice sun is furthest in the south as it can be, then it starts to turn around. So I thought, okay, I wonder if they're talking about the distance between those 2 points on the horizon. So I took stellarium and I just, put in some dates. And so there's the moon on the nearest full moon to the winter solstice. And then I just kind of tracked it and say, okay, well, what happens there? And then by golly, what is that? There's three stars. Could it be? It is. But again, going back to the statement, it never changes its position of rising, and it rises in between. So I thought, okay, well, where does the winter solstice sun rise? Is it exactly in between where the full moon nearest the solstice and that sun rises? Let's find out. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Oh, there it is. Here it comes. There's the sun. And look at that. So I just threw up some real little arrows, and it's approximately visually it would be about center. That's cool, man. But what does it mean? That's what I want to know. That's the next question. I think this is really cool. This got me really excited. Like, okay, it has to be this. I don't know for sure. That's for debate among us Indigenous folks, especially in my community, if that's right. But again, why would that be notable? So there must be something deeper connected to the rising of this canoe, the midpoint of this canoe around the solstice. And maybe it just didn't mark the mid, the middle of the year or the end of the year. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But that's all I have for that. And we can continue this discussion and questions.
Yes.
Questions.
Well, I certainly have some questions. I don't know, Marley, if you have any questions. Well, first off, I just want to go back. You've already taken away your images, but I think we all kind of can remember the Orion. Sure, if you could just bring back the image of Orion in the canoe, because one thing that, of course, I have never really realized until you just pointed out that in the constellation of Orion, and the way, even when I am describing the constellation of Orion to a group of kids in the planetarium or outside by our observatory, is that really the main focuses are Betelgeuse, Rigel, and the three stars, because Betelgeuse and Rigel are the two brightest. They are the two focal points because they are different colors. Betelgeuse and Rigel are one's red and Rigel is blue. And then, of course, you have the three stars in the middle there. And of course, if you were to reform that constellation as a canoe, it makes a lot more sense as Betelgeuse and Rigel being at other ends of the canoe, and that being kind of significant because they are very different. Betelgeuse is a very old star, and Rigel is a much newer star. Is that what you're saying, Marley?
No, I mean, yeah, it's a different way of looking at it for sure. I would have never thought to look at it, the constellation like this. I also can't see pictures in the stars like anyways. It's like, but this is...
It got trained out of you?
Well, I can't picture things in my brain. It's like a long story, but like, I don't see them. And so this is like it's much easier for me to see a canoe than it is to see like a person with a bow and arrow necessarily. Yeah.
Same here. I could never visualize what Orion, how did it come to be that? Same with like the bear. It's just it's an odd connection of stars. I mean, but that's somebody's tradition and they seen it like that. So I didn't want to discount. Well, of course, everybody has their own traditions and how they see it, but yeah. So in this particular case, this was pretty eye-opening to me when I was finding these things about the story. So the other two stars is it Bellatrix and I don't know how to say the other one on the bottom. Sapphire? Is it Sapphire?
Safe, I think.
Safe,
I don't know that.
So those are the other two brothers that are they're not brothers, actually, they're friends working on this canoe.
Okay.
So that whole constellation is or all those stars are part of it, but that's the canoe part, and then the other ones are the guy sitting in the canoe. So pretty interesting.
Absolutely. You know what? We've got a couple of really interesting comments from Pride of Keith, as usual, on this. But we did have a question actually from Phoenix, which Marley's already sort of answered. But I think it would be nice to throw into this chat as well, because you started off us by this perspective of looking up at the stars is actually looking down, and sort of flipping that perspective of like the mirror. And Phoenix's question was, how far does space go? And I guess like in this context, like how far down are we looking if we sort of flip that around? Marley, do you want to sort of like restate your answer to that question, like how far space could go? And maybe Shandin, maybe you could give your perspective on that as well.
Right. So from what I was taught, like how far space went, which I took in context of the question to be the universe, like how far the universe goes, to our current understanding is that it goes on forever. Like the universe is continuously expanding. And so the question was, what would happen if you passed all the galaxies, sort of thing? And one of the schools of thought in that is that you wouldn't pass all of the galaxies. You would just continuously pass different galaxies as you went on into infinity. And that is kind of the answer I was taught in school.
And so, Shandin, is there anything from your discoveries that would have any other different perspective on that?
Well, I think the most important part of all this is an understanding that a lot of these thoughts and conceptions of what we see is really grounded in a very practical sense. I know I had a moment in my life when I was a kid where I wondered how far out does that go, and it got me feeling very claustrophobic because I felt so small and closed in on Earth. I don't know if you ever had that feeling, like, wow, the immensity of space, So I think a lot of these things, like if we theorize about what is and what is that what is out there and what is reality, that helps us to draw the boundary a bit further beyond what we can see, in our minds. But I think a lot of these things, and in particular these stories, are told from a very practical standpoint, that they lead to something that is very practical and important to us humans on Earth. And a lot of these really tell of misdeeds and behaviors that are not very admirable. So they really they show us how our potential. They show us our potential, which is often not good. So it keeps us in check in a way. So that very practical piece. So I couldn't say that how far my ancestors looked and how the actual length one looked into the sky. That's a bit difficult, but our stories do tell of the animals actually going into the sky, and that's how some of them got there. So it grounds it in a real practical sense, like an earthly thing.
Well, and I guess in another sense, in the way that you've kind of like flipped that around, because we were looking physically at a distance out in space, but also in a very practical sense, we were looking back in time. So if we were to flip that around, we were also looking back in time at us as well, right? Because that's the beginnings of the universe out there. So that really is us, even though it's not practically us, but it is us in the sense of like everything.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point about the not only like a spatial scale, but like a temporal scale. And I think that's important, that some of these stories and understanding how they manifest in the sky really helps us to reach back into time in a way and to see something that was. And that really grounds us, I think. It makes things more purposeful, and it helps us to center our work today and what we do on Earth. That's just my thought, is when we're able to reach back with ease by looking up and say, oh, wow, look at that. That happened in our history, and I can still see it.
Yeah.
We can't see some other things in our history, more recent history, because we're not able to. But these things have been locked in a way in the night sky, and they're accessible to anybody and everybody just to look up.
Oh, Shandin, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm really sad that we've run out of time. I think we're going to have to look ahead to the future and perhaps bring you in to our space and do something a little bit longer, and perhaps under the dome of our planetarium. I think that would be really wonderful.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Awesome.
And thanks for giving me the time right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We will definitely do this again. Shandin Pete from UBC, thank you for joining us. And of course, Marley, our trusted astronomer, will be back here on YouTube in 2 weeks. That is June the 16th. We'll be back here on YouTube at 2 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you so much for everyone that joined in YouTube, or if you're out there watching on Telesoptic, if you want to join and ask some live questions, you can come on in to YouTube at that specific time. Until then, take care, everyone. Look up.